I just feel like the afternoon's been absolutely packed with brilliant ideas all the way from start to finish. I was due to pull together a few reflecting thoughts, but I've actually handed that task over to Professor Gillian Ruch, who is part of our PANDA project. She's the expert that we have brought in to guide and advise us on the work that we're doing. So I hope she's with us and she's able to share her concluding reflections, and then I realise by then we'll be slightly over time, but if there are questions that people have, then perhaps we could hang on for 10 minutes at the end. So we'll finish at 4:10 roughly, rather than 4. So Gillian, if you're there,
I'm here, Karen.
Love you to share your reflections with us. Thank you so much.
That's okay, thank you. Let me try and share my screen if I can. Those of you that were with us in Norway will recognise this. I was asked to do a similar task in Norway. Can you see this? Yeah, lovely. And I was doing it more as the session was going on in Norway, whereas here I've sort of come in on this task slightly later, but I thought it was useful to try and use the same image really, because I've been at all 4 of the events now, and the common themes that are coming through are very powerful, and also some of the differences across the different European contexts. And what I've used here is a model that we developed in the work that Karen and I were involved in, called the Talking and Listening to Children project, where we devised this idea of an ecological model of communication, thinking about the child, their personal and family circumstances, which would be the yellow circle, and the wider context in which they are located, the social and political context. And here I'm just thinking of it as a way of thinking about what we've been hearing about through the PANDA project in relation to what we might think about as ecological participation. And this real emphasis of the PANDA project to move from rhetoric to reality. What does this really mean for us? And I think we've heard a lot of what it really means on the ground this afternoon in Northern Ireland. And if we just start up in the top right here in relation to policy, and I'm going to say people's names incorrectly, I'm sure, so I apologise, I'll do my best. Is it Kula and Elish? Lovely Irish names, or maybe not all Irish, I'm not quite sure, but anyway. This issue of the Northern Irish context and reference to the Troubles, and I was struck here by the issue of the wider political context in which people are working with children, even if those children maybe weren't born during the period which was called the Troubles. The collective trauma within the national context can't be ignored because it's within the history of these children's families. And so I was drawing parallels in my mind when we were in Spain, in Madrid, thinking about the impact of the dictatorship in Spain, and how this wider context has to be part of our thinking, even if it's not at the fore of our thinking when we're actually engaged in the room with the child. But it can't be ignored because it's part of the cultural, the political, the social context. But also I've put the phrase in here, lines of sight, and this is a term that's been used by a senior social care inspector in the English context, but she talked about having lines of sight, that we must have lines of sight on a child, which maybe is an unfortunate image because it might have sort of military connotations. So, I mean, it may not be the right phrase at all, but what she was meaning was that people at the very top of the organisation, so people in roles like children's commissioners or senior managers and directors of children's services, need to know the children that they are the corporate parent for. And that then will have bearing on how the practitioners who are engaging directly with the children take up their task, because this idea of relationship will be throughout the whole organisation and within the sort of organisational psyche of working with children. So I think we must always be thinking at the macro level, as well as right down at the micro level. The second box here, I've referred to as sort of practice and procedures, and we heard some beautiful examples of things being adapted to work with children. And I was thinking about, you know, the senses, how we use our senses. And the ones that came to the fore for me this afternoon were just simply seeing the child, being with the child. The difference between perhaps hearing and listening, we might put an emphasis on the fact that we listen, but do we hear them? Are we hearing what's being said? And how are we hearing it? Are we just hearing it through the words? Or are there other ways in which children are communicating to us? So needing to be alert to all that non-verbal communication that was referenced in one of the more practice-focused presentations. And I loved this reference to touching the child in the Child Protection Conference who our colleague sat next to her so that she could offer that, really just those simple, small indications of awareness of what children need. So it's seeing, hearing, listening and touching at all levels, not just when you're directly in practice, but if you're in a management role, chairing any forum where a child might be present. So of course that gets us thinking about head, heart and hands, something passionate, I know, close to Karen's heart, something she's passionate about, which we've written about, the influence of social pedagogy on our social work practice. And I made a reference here to something called Me and My World. As I was hearing that last presentation, this is work that's been done by a colleague in Brighton in England around developing children's recording for looked after children in a way that is child-centered. And I felt a lot of the work that we were hearing about then had strong resonances with how do we make things child-centered. And as we heard, and we heard in Belgium too, co-created, lovely examples in Belgium and here of resources being co-created with children. So if it's an app that they need, then it's an app we need to be developing. We have to respond to where the children are. But also within the practice and procedures square here, social workers can only listen to the extent that they are listened to. And that's something that maybe didn't necessarily come out of this presentation, but it's something that I hold on strongly to, because we're always tasking ourselves of how we can do our job better. But in order to do our job, we need to be listened to. We need to have those spaces where we can process and digest the difficult information that we might be exposed to, that is the child's lived experience. And then over in the left-hand side, the person, the child at the centre of the ecological model, the uniqueness of the child, which I love those examples of football, Lego, superheroes. I've added unicorns in here. I just wondered if anybody noticed if there were any unicorns, but I put the unicorns in to see if you're still awake with us. But just adapting standardised ways of doing things, of which there are a lot, but making them personal to the child. You know, you can't underestimate how a child will respond to that and feel recognised. So finally, I mean, the three challenges that I've just put down here, and I'm sure there are many more. Inga Sophie, one of our colleagues in Norway on the PANDA project, put in the chat. She totally agreed with this idea of thinking of children as partners and participants in this process. But what does it mean to move from a position of a child being a partner as opposed to a client? How will we know that? And then from activity to process, what I'm thinking about here is we have lots of wonderful examples here of creative ways of engaging with children. And we've heard them across all four of our presentations over the past few weeks. But how also are we addressing the skills and the understanding about what the child does with the activity? So it's not just the content of what they do, but how they do it, and how are we developing our skill set as practitioners so that we can be alert to the process as well as the content of the sessions. And that then leads us to think about, we have to start in our head and think about what does a child need and how can we engage with them. We need to move to our hearts in order to engage with the child and allow ourselves to be open to their experiences and their emotions. And we need to take that knowledge then back to our heads in order to be able to inform the decision-making process on behalf of the child. And there was an important contribution, I think, in the chat about children must be involved in the decision-making process. They must be active participants, but they must also understand it is not their sole responsibility to decide what happens in their lives. Adults need to play their part in making decisions, but children's voices must be part of that decision-making process. Thank you.